Hey, I'm golf broadcaster Matt Adams. The updated and expanded second edition of my book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments, is now available. Readers can expect to march with Arnie's Army at the 1960 U.S. Open, relive Jack Nicklaus's remarkable 1986 Masters win, and be amazed by the Tiger Slam. The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments. Pick it up where fine books are sold, including BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com.
And we'd like to welcome everybody back to the Football is Family podcast. We got a guest that's been on a few times, but it's been a while. This Darin Hayes. Darin, can you just again introduce yourself and your show and everything else?
Yeah, my name's Darin Hayes. I have a couple podcasts here on Sports History Network, the Pigskin Dispatch podcast and the Sports Jersey Dispatch podcast. And, have a great time talking about sports history all the time and football history on Pigskin Dispatch like we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, I enjoy your show. It's very fast paced. I don't know well, I guess because you are from the North, you could talk a lot faster than us Southerners. So that's probably part of it.
that could be, but remember, my mother's from down your way in Tennessee. She's from Gatlinburg, so I have some Southern roots to me too.
But see, Eastern Tennessee is as north as it comes in Tennessee, so it is what it is. Darin, what? I'm just glad you got to come on. It's hard to get a hold of you because of all the stuff you got going on, but you have something special that just a little bit ago had been released. What is it? What did you do?
Well, we took our media project to a whole new level. We've done the podcasting, we have the websites, done some audio dramas and some things like that. We decided to write a book, and it's on a team that's local to me here in Western Pennsylvania, a team from 120 years ago. Actually, 120 years ago right now, from the 1903 season, Franklin, Pennsylvania All-Stars. And, they're sort of a forgotten team, but they're probably one of the most unforgettable teams in history.
Franklin. Yeah, you know what? I am completely ignorant on this. And I thought, well, I could do a quick search on this. I'm not going to do that because I got you to educate me. So tell me about this team.
All right, let's go back in time a little bit. Franklin, Pennsylvania, for those that haven't heard of it, is you've probably heard of Edwin Drake. Edwin Drake discovered the first commercial oil well in Western Pennsylvania in Venango County of Pennsylvania, which is probably about 50, 60 miles south of where I am in Erie. It's halfway between Erie and Pittsburgh. And Drake, you heard of Drake's Follies. That was what they call it, because they thought it was such a folly that he was drilling this well by Oil Creek, which feeds down into the Ohio River eventually. Well, the towns that sprung up there, because wealth, where there's oil, there's wealth, and a couple towns really sprung up, Franklin being one of them, named for Benjamin Franklin. There was a Fort Franklin there between the British and the French back in the Revolutionary War and before eras, and Oil City. And these two towns were extremely wealthy, 9 miles apart, and they, of course, had a rivalry, not only through business rivalries with the oil and everything going on, but they had athleticism rivalries too, starting off in baseball and working their way into football at the turn of the last century. And that's sort of what sparked the building of this Franklin team, is just the tremendous rivalry they had with Oil City. Oil City in 1902 had a team, and they decided they were going to play Franklin right at Thanksgiving time, so right about this time of the year, and they were going to play 2 or 3 games that year against Franklin. And where there's money and there's athletes and athleticism, well, there's always been gambling. And so there's quite a bit of money back in the day with these millionaires betting on their favorite team, their home team. And Oil City decided to step it up a little bit because Franklin had a pretty good team going in. So Oil City decided to go and get some ringers on Thanksgiving Day. And they ended up back in 1902, there was the original National Football League, not associated with the National Football League we know today, but there was a 3-team league, the Philadelphia Athletics, which were associated with the baseball team. Connie Mack was in charge of it. The Philadelphia Phillies, again, associated with the baseball team, and the Pittsburgh Stars, which weren't really associated with the Pittsburgh Pirates, but there was a lot of athletes from the area, Pittsburgh. And these 3 teams had the original National Football League going on. Their championship game for that league was the Philadelphia Athletics visiting the Pittsburgh Stars on what we call Black Friday, the Friday after Thanksgiving. So Franklin and Oil City play on Thanksgiving Day, and they end up tying. I'm sorry, they played the previous week and they tied. Oil City won 6-5 on Thanksgiving Day, and they decided to have sort of a rubber match, because Franklin, wanted to have a game back at their place. So Oil City went and they grabbed the whole team of the Philadelphia Athletics, who played the championship game in the NFL the day before, hired the whole team in and beat Franklin. It was a close score. It was something like 12-7 or something. It wasn't, a blowout. Franklin held their own, but Franklin lost a lot of money. They were kind of miffed about this. So a guy by the name of General Charles Miller, who fought in the Civil War, was sort of probably the richest guy in Franklin. He ended up hiring the manager of the football team. He said, "I don't care what it takes, build the best football team that's going to beat Oil City next year, the following season, 1903. I don't care what it takes. I don't care how much it costs." So this gentleman, a young clothing merchant in Franklin, Dave Prince was his name. He ended up going out and hiring the best football players in the world at the time. He hired probably about half of the team of the Philadelphia Athletics, half the team of the Pittsburgh Stars, grabbed some of the greatest collegiate players of the day, and brought them into the Franklin fold for a full season of 1903, basically to beat Oil City in 3 games the following year, so these guys could get their money back. So that's sort of the basis of how they started.
When you talk about hiring a whole team, they were not under contract for years, were they? They were just under contract per game.
Yeah, it was sort of a different world there. You could go and play on team. There was famous baseball players that played all the time, like Rube Waddell would play. Actually, he played against Franklin in the 1903 season. He played for a team called Grove City one week, and the next week he was playing for Butler, football. But he was a baseball player, a Major League Baseball player. So, yeah, that wasn't the contracts that they have today. You could play outside of your league against other teams.
Imagine George Pickens playing for the Steelers Sunday and then next Sunday playing for the Eagles. I mean, that would be weird.
Yeah, and that's actually what started in the NFL. They had that same problem in the APFA in the 1920s, and they ended up having a meeting on it. And I think it was like the early 1921, 1922, when they were first becoming the NFL from the APFA. They ended up putting rules in place so you couldn't jump ship and jump teams like that, because quite a few teams were doing it. Actually, a lot of teams from the original AFL, the Red Grange League in the 1920s, were playing for like the Philadelphia Quakers that won that league. And then they would go and play for the Buffalo All-Americans in the NFL. One on Saturday, would jump over on Sunday and play for the other team. It was he had some things going on like that. So eventually the NFL put a kibosh to that, and the contract stood.
Golly, their bodies must have taken a beating to play that many games in a row. I can't imagine that.
Yeah, it's these guys were athletes. Like I said, they were the best of the time. A lot of baseball players played football. Christy Mathewson played in that original NFL. Rube Waddell, like we talked about. A guy on Franklin, their quarterback, was a man by the name of Jack Hayden, and he played on quite a few different Major League Baseball teams as well during the baseball season.
The one thing about you, Darin, that I appreciate and I respect is that you not only have passion, but you show passion. This was a passion project for you, wasn't it?
It was, because it was a local story. When I officiated quite a few games between Franklin High School and Oil City High School, which still are a rivalry to this day. They don't have professional teams anymore. But these two teams, they're neighbors, but when there's neighbors and you have two schools about the same time, or two professional football teams or baseball teams, or whatever, there's going to be competition. And so I've lived through part of that rivalry on the officiating side of it, and I've enjoyed it. And when I came across the story a few years ago, it caught my interest because of the town. And when I got into it, especially this past year, what it uncovered, it blew my mind about this team. And they really changed the course of professional football history.
So if somebody was getting into this book, and where is it available? And we'll have it in the show notes and everything like that.
Well, it's the title of it is The World's Greatest Pro Gridiron Team, the 1903 Franklin All-Stars. It's available on Amazon. It's in ebook format. By the time this comes out, you'll be able to get it on hardcover and in paperback there. And you can find links on pigskindispatch.com. We have it right on our front page to get you those Amazon links too. So you can get that way too.
So if people are going to read this, they need to get out of this whole modern day football, the Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift stuff, and go back when it wasn't so glamorous.
Well, sort of, because it was sort of glamorous for that era.
Okay. So it's the time frame. Yeah.
It's a time frame. But remember, professional football was sort of looked down at this time. College football was king. Yeah. College was king, and pros were just a bunch of, has-been collegians that were trying to make a couple bucks, and a lot of the college coaches sort of looked down upon it and thought that it was bad. It was a college game. It should just end at college for those ranks, is what they thought. Yeah. And many prominent, I'm talking like Amos Alonzo Stagg and Bob Zupke and all those all the way into the 20s. They thought that way.
Well, I think there was a movie, and I might have it wrong, Leatherheads with George Clooney. I watched that, but I was into football history, but I didn't go that far back. And I watched that. It's like, why is it that the college ranks? And then what you're talking about, I started reading. I'm like, oh. And Red Grange, I believe he was the one that kind of bridged the gap between the two professions, college and pro. And that's pretty cool. But the fact is, this was a regional situation that kind of got a little bit bigger when money got involved, wasn't it?
It certainly was. 1903 comes along, and they have some of the greatest players on their squad. As a matter of fact, the PFRA in their Coffin Corner magazine, unbeknownst to me, they had one of the guys there, John Wilkie, wrote an article 2 months ago when the Coffin Corner came out, and he had the greatest players from certain eras. In the 1900 to 1910 era, there's 3 players that were on this Franklin team that were on that all-era team. Jack Hayden, we talked about a little bit at the quarterback. You had Herman Kirchhoff, who was a big lineman that he played for probably 15 years all over. He played in the Midwest, played in Colorado, played for the Philadelphia Athletics, and played for the Franklin Stars, and eventually played on the Canton Bulldogs, Massillon Tigers. I forget which one, but he played for one of those. So
wow, that's pretty big.
Yeah, these guys were big. And this team, you sit there and think of one of the things that they did, it was a dramatic shift in football that Franklin is responsible for. Okay, 1892, Pudge Heffelfinger is the first paid pro football player in the area of Pittsburgh, Western Pennsylvania. And it goes all the way through. All you hear about it for professional football for the next 10 years is Western Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. 1903, in the NFL, the original NFL, 3 Pennsylvania teams. Well, you don't hear about a professional football team after Franklin, 1903, until, you hear a little bit on the east side, Pottsville Maroons, Frankford Yellow Jackets, but you really don't hear about anything until the blue laws in Pennsylvania were lifted in 1933, Philadelphia Eagles, Pittsburgh Steelers come into play. Because everything shifted after 1903 over across the border, which is only 15 miles, 20 miles from Franklin, into Ohio, for Canton, Massillon, Youngstown, Akron, all those teams over there. The mythical Ohio League started up from sort of 1904 all the way through the 1920s when the NFL came in.
So, and explain the blue laws if people don't know what that is.
Well, the blue laws, Pennsylvania decided that, there was a very religious, Christian-oriented government at the time, and they said, you can't have professionalism working on Sundays. So whether you're a shopkeeper or you're a blacksmith or a professional baseball player, professional football player, you can't get paid to work on Sundays except for ministers. So that was sort of the what the blue law said, and
I can respect that.
So today you respect it. You see like the Hobby Lobbies and the Chick-fil-A's, they respect the blue laws, which is a very, very good thing.
I remember growing up in the 80s when Orange 79, but I remember in the 80s a lot of things were shut down. A lot of mills. So after church we would I think Taco Bell was the only one that made my mom real happy. We went to Taco Bell, which now I'm thinking I can relate to that. It's okay.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Mhm.
What made the blue laws change?
Well, the blue laws in 1933, I think they got some different folks in government that, and business was really thriving. You went through the Great Depression in 1933, and people were trying to come up with better ways to make income. I think that's part of it. So you needed to work on Sundays. For professional sports in Pennsylvania, 1933 was the big year, and the Eagles, who were owned by our friend, Upton Bell's father, Bert Bell, and his mother, Mary Frances Upton, they had an inkling, and so did Art Rooney in Pittsburgh, that they were going to be lifted. So they bought it, their franchise in the NFL. That 1933 season, the Eagles and the Steelers, the first couple weeks, they played, their home games were on Saturdays, or they played an away game. They didn't play on Sundays. Middle of the year, probably like Octoberish, I forget the exact date, the blue law is repealed, and the Steelers and Eagles can have home games on Sundays, and they're welcomed into the NFL with big hugs and big games.
Well, you got me thinking about some things when you mentioned this shift from Pennsylvania to Ohio because of a law. How long did it take for? Well, let me see if I can.
Well, it wasn't the shift because of the law. The law. And I'm sorry if I confused you. The law was what allowed the Steelers and the Eagles come in 1933 when the law was repealed.
Oh, well, before the law, or when the law was, the shift kind of moved to Ohio because of the law. Did I get that correct?
Well, I'm saying that the Franklin team, because they bought up all the players, and they ended up basically squashing the original NFL.
Oh, okay.
They took all their big players out of it. It would have been like if the USFL would come in and hire all the NFL players away, and nobody wanted to go to the NFL games anymore because they all went to the USFL. That's sort of what they did with one team.
This kid's why we don't have monopolies, or we shouldn't have monopolies. Teddy Roosevelt would have had a lot of problems with that.
Well, Teddy Roosevelt was a president at the time when this was going on. Remember?
I do.
From 1901 to 1909.
But this probably wasn't that big of a deal to him compared to Standard Oil.
No, and well, Standard Oil ended up buying. When I talked about General Charles Miller and Joseph Sibley, who owned the Franklin team, they were the board of directors basically. Standard Oil, Rockefeller ended up buying out their companies, Galena Signal Oil Company, and that's where their wealth really increased right around the same time too.
Golly, history and football just meshing. You live in the hotbed of the history of pro football. You live in that area, not only with the era that you're talking about, but with Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and then the Eagles blending together with the Steelers during World War II, and then with the Cardinals as well. The Carpets, if I remember correctly.
Right.
What is it about this state that you're in, Pennsylvania, that really brought pro football the way it is? What do you think it was?
Well, there was a lot of innovators that came from this area. I mean, John Heisman grew up in the same area of Western Pennsylvania. I believe he grew up in Titusville. Don't quote me on that. Somewhere in that same area.
I didn't know that.
John Heisman's from there. Pop Warner. I mean, up in Erie, we're up in sort of the smokestack of Pennsylvania, right up by Lake Erie. So we're within 20 miles of the New York line, within 20 miles of the Ohio line. So, but up in Springfield, New York, Pop Warner was born, which is not far from us. Heisman was actually born in Cleveland, moved over to Western Pennsylvania as a kid, and that's where he went to school and everything. The Pitt Panther teams that in Washington, W&J, Washington Jefferson of that era, the early 1900s through the 1920s, had some tremendous teams and coaches that went through. Jock Sutherland, Pop Warner was there. Pop Warner was at Carlisle over on the east side of the state. So Penn State wasn't a big factor back in this era, but the University of Pennsylvania was, because it was one of the original, what we call Ivy League schools now, competing with the Yales and the Princetons and Harvards of that era. So there were some great teams and great players that came out of Pennsylvania, because it's sort of Pennsylvania is sort of part of it. The east side is sort of an East Coast society, and on the west side, we're sort of a Midwestern society. So we're sort of a mixing pot in Pennsylvania. And when the two of those collide, I guess you get some rivalry and some different styles of football and different politics and everything else.
Well, what's fascinating me as well, in Tennessee, we didn't have a football team until 97, really. So I didn't have any loyalty to a local. It was the Broncos because I saw John Elway play and I thought that guy's cool. For you, growing up in your area, there's a division between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, correct?
Well, not even. Philadelphia is probably about 6 hours away. Where I am in Erie, we are almost 100 miles away from Buffalo, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh.
Oh,
we're in the middle of a
gracious.
triangle. So we've got 3 NFL teams within 2 hours. We can be in their home stadium from where I live.
Good gracious.
Canton's not that far. Canton's an hour and 45 minutes away.
God, nice. So did you have a lot? I know this has nothing to do with the book, but I'm fascinated with this. Did you have a lot of pull from Pittsburgh, Buffalo, and Cleveland for your loyalty?
Well, it's a split thing. My family grew up, my dad always says, and my grandfather, they worked in factories here in Erie, and they always, everything was Browns, Cleveland Browns, and they couldn't stand hearing these guys talk about Cleveland. They were Pennsylvania guys, and they wanted to root for a Pennsylvania team, so they were rooting for the Steelers, who would get demolished by these, great Browns teams with Paul Brown and Jim Brown and Otto Graham and all of them. So they're sort of laughing stocks till the 70s, when that's about when I started watching football, is the immaculate reception and everything. And I can remember my dad, my grandfather put me in front of the TV at 6 years old and said, "You got to see this. Watch this play." As they're showing the replays, and I had no idea what was going on. But that's sort of, I was sort of bred into it. And it's Western Pennsylvania it's a hard-nosed football from the north all the way to the south. It's tough-nosed football, and it's a football place. That's our sport here in Western Pennsylvania.
So
And,
if I were to drive up there, which I don't know if y'all would let me go up that far north, I don't think it would. I actually tried out at a church in Ohio, and it was on one of the lakes up there, and it was March, and there was a foot of snow, and I thought, I like this, but this might get old after a while.
oh, there was only a foot that day?
Elyria, Ohio. That's where it was.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Only
That's not too far from us.
It's a beautiful area. It's very, very beautiful area up there. But if I were to drive up north right now and drive in your area, would I see just solid black and gold, or would I see a lot of different things?
No, right now, with the fan bases, Buffalo is sort of the hot ticket the last few years because they've had the better team of the 3. So if you're in Erie, you'll see Buffalo flags flying around. You'll still see Steelers and Browns things all over the place. This year, everybody's sort of, right in the same boat. And there's a big rivalry, going here. Our TV rights for the NFL has deemed us a Buffalo market.
Oh, come on. That to me would hurt if you were a Steelers fan.
Oh, it definitely does. And there's more Steelers and Browns fans than there are Buffalo fans, if you probably did per capita.
I don't understand the rights. We were in Alabama for a couple of years, and I wanted my Titans games. They didn't have NFL Sunday Ticket yet. And finally, the year before we moved, we got Tennessee games, and it just blew me away. I was like, all right, that's pretty cool. But Sunday Ticket kind of changed things, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. There was times when I was a kid when Buffalo really wasn't all that good, and the Steelers and Browns teams, Steelers winning Super Bowls, the Browns are right there with them, very competitive. Brian Sipe and the Pruitts in the backfield and everything. And there was games where the Steelers and Browns, every year you would have one game blacked out in our area because they'd have Buffalo on, and you'd have to drive to Ohio or down near Pittsburgh to see the game, because you couldn't watch the game of these two, titans of the, AFC at the time, but you'd watch the lowly Bills play, whoever they were playing, the Jets or something. That wasn't a good game.
Would you do it? Would your family do that?
Oh yeah, we did it occasionally, or we'd go to the game. And I was at the game in Cleveland when Turkey Jones dumped Terry Bradshaw on his head. I was in the old Cleveland Coliseum. that was kind of a emotional thing that happened there. But
that I see, this is what I like about not only with you and hearing your podcasts, which is fantastic, but also just hearing from you right now is somebody who has a lifelong fandom from 6 years old to now. 6, you didn't understand it, but you were there. I can't relate to that because I didn't have that. But hearing, your family talking, your grandfather, your dad, you traveling to games, going to Cleveland to watch a game, that's what I appreciate about you, Darin, and even the book that you wrote that you've written. I could see the love and respect that you have for your teams. I respect that. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, it's not hard to respect the Franklin team, though. Okay, because not only did they change professional football that way by making the shift to go over to Ohio and really propelling the Ohio League and taking it out of Pennsylvania for decades, but this team was so good. I mean, what's the most dominant professional football team that you can think of? Name a team.
Dominant, like over a period of time, or
dominant even one season, you can say. I mean, who's the most dominant?
Probably, and I hate to say this because this makes me really sick to say it, probably the 2000 Ravens. Or how about this? And I can't remember the exact year, the year that the Patriots, was 2008 that they went undefeated, or was that 2007?
2007, they went undefeated and lost the Super Bowl.
That probably was about a notch better than the Ravens in 2000.
Yeah, those are two common teams. The 72 Dolphins, of course, they're undefeated championship season. The 1948 Browns in the AFC, they went undefeated, won the AFC title. Okay, but those teams, Franklin did a lot better than them, actually. They called Miami the perfect season. Well, people scored on Miami that year. I mean, in the Super Bowl, they beat Washington 14-7, so people obviously scored. Franklin went undefeated, unscored upon. And this is 3 years before the forward pass was legal. They scored, touchdowns were worth 5 points. And with that in mind, they scored 0.92 points per minute played before the forward pass. Only 2 teams crossed midfield all season long, and those were on fumble recoveries that Franklin tracked down and tackled them, and those teams either on the next play gave up the ball by a fumble or were tackled on the other side of midfield. So there's only 2 plays against them all season on their side of the field. They played 12 games. 2 of them were in a postseason tournament called the World Series of Football, the second World Series of Football, in Madison Square Gardens in December 1903, playing against the best teams that professional football had to offer at the time.
God, so that's good gracious. That is insane. To think that you can go, you would think a fluke play they'd score a touchdown, and it didn't happen. Well, let's just say this. Maybe their style of football couldn't translate today, but we don't have to worry about them translating. They did what they did in the time that they had it. And that's what's awesome about that.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, just to put the scoring in perspective, I wrote an article a couple years ago on Pigskin Dispatch, and they had we talked about the greatest scoring teams of all time. And actually, I think it was the 1950s, for 56, 55, Los Angeles Rams scored the most points per game on average, and they were like 38.5 points per game. Kansas City Chiefs from a couple years ago, they were like 35 point range. And some of our more modern teams, 35 points a game on average. So if you sit there and think about that in a 60-minute game that they played, that's a little over a half a point a minute. Pretty darn good, though. That's a lot.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
So think about they had the forward pass, so they could move the ball really quick. Think about this. Every play is a running play up the middle. It's almost like a quarterback sneak or a fullback dive every single play of the game. And they're scoring a point a minute, almost a point a minute, with touchdowns only being worth 5 points. If touchdowns were worth 6 points, I calculated it out per minute, they were averaging 1.2 points per minute running the ball.
Now, let me ask you this, because I cannot keep the dates correctly. Did they have the hash marks at that time?
They had the gridiron at that time.
Okay.
So you had that was 1903 was the first year that they had the full goal line to goal line grid, 5-yard grids all the way up and down where the gridiron comes from.
So when you have up the middle runs, because with the hash marks you can do a lot more on the outside, up the middle runs. scoring nearly a point a minute. God gracious.
Yeah, it blows your mind. That's what I'm saying. It's a pretty dominant team. And, but that's also the reason why parity in the NFL is so important. If we take a lesson of, because it's great if you're a Franklin fan, but if you're a Syracuse, All-Stars, or the Watertown Red Blacks, who are their big rivals, or the East End Athletic Club out of Pittsburgh, it wasn't so much fun. And by the way, Oil City that year forfeited and would not play Franklin those 3 games that they built this team for. So they built this team, and they didn't really have the team they really wanted to play.
They couldn't do it. They could.
No.
You talk about parity, and I got a couple more minutes, Darin, before Zoom tells me to quit. I saw something yesterday that said next year Cleveland will have to eat almost $69 million a cap hit for Deshaun Watson. They got to do it this year. So you're talking about parity. Sometimes parity can be done, but also contracts might be a little rough to swallow. And they said that if they cut him, $200 million worth of dead space, you'd have to gut the team. So
yeah, it probably wasn't the best investment after these first 2 years of it, but it's $250 million guaranteed 5 years. So it's about $50 million a year is on average what they have to pay him. I think last year was less. That's why it goes up to $69 million next year. But just think he played 6 games last year and 6 games in 2023 of a 17-game schedule. So take $50 million divided by 6, and that's a pretty good chunk of change he's making per game.
And that's when I saw the price that Kansas City was going to pay for Patrick Mahomes, and to me, he's worth it. But I thought you're going to lose out on some players because you can't keep up with that. Parity.
Right.
Titans have $100 million worth of cap space next year. Let's see what happens with that. Darin, like I said, I have to head out. Where can we get your book again?
Again, you can go to pigskindispatch.com or go on Amazon and either search under the world's greatest pro gridiron team or under my name, Darin Hayes, Darin Hayes.
Darin is going to be in Tennessee soon. And I was like, man, we get to meet. We're going to be passing in the night, my friend, just passing in the night. But we'll hook up. I'll show up at your door one day with my bag, say, hey, can I stay here for a couple of days and see what happens?
Yeah, anytime, Jeremy. You got it.
Thank you, Darin. And thank y'all for listening to the Football's Family Podcast.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude. And I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you got to do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you got to do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.